Great, welcome. Anybody walking by who has employees, come and sit down. This is going to be a lot of quick, terrific information to help you deal with everybody's favorite topic, human resources. We are scheduled for 30 minutes. I'm happy to continue to talk to you afterward if you have questions, and then I'll be at the OIA booth for the rest of the morning. So what I've done, because it's supposed to be a 30-minute session, is divided up into really 3 topics that come up most often in human resources. And those are compliance, total compensation, and hiring great people. And then at the end, I'm going to go ahead and share with you a couple of tips that are really critical for small business. I primarily work with businesses that have under 20 employees, under 50 employees, depending on the size. But anyone who has employees, this is of interest to. So I've talked a little bit to the people in the audience, and we'll customize it to you. Feel free to ask specific questions, especially if we stay a small group like this. But let's get started with the compliance portion, because that's what people ask me about all the time. Let's talk about employee files. I just got this question this morning from someone. What am I supposed to keep in an employee file? The answer is really only those documents that you need to refer back to during the course of someone's employment. So here is a list of the things that I think are really important. You want to make sure, come on over, we're just getting started. It's all about employees. You want to make sure you've got the proper tax forms. Everybody should be filling out, when they start working with you, a W-4 for both the federal government and your state. You should have an official employment application. Do you guys use employment applications in your businesses when people apply? Everybody use them, hopefully. They're really easy to make up these days. You don't have to pay for them, but you have to be very careful what you're asking. So make sure that you've got that in the employee file. You don't have to keep a record of everything you do with everybody. What it's also important that you know is what not to put in the employee file. You don't want to put your health records in there. So do you all offer benefits? So the benefit application should not be in the employment application, because especially for small businesses, your benefit application typically has personal information on it. So you don't want that in your employee file. And if you guys want, I'm happy to send you these slides so you don't have to feel like you have to write everything down. I've also left some cards out there that you can take notes. If any of you want to come over and listen to a little bit about HR, join us for a few minutes. The last thing are I-9 documents. And hopefully you all know what an I-9 is, and you all have I-9s. Those should always be separate from your employee files. You don't want, again, they contain a lot of personal information. So you don't want them in the employee file where other people can have access to them. And we'll talk about I-9 forms right now so that you understand what you're filling out as you're doing them. One thing I like to share with people, and it's the reason that I have it highlighted here in this circle, is the I-9 form you are using today should be expired. I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous, right? Why am I using an expired form? Our government has yet to approve a new form. So the form you should be using today says in the upper right-hand corner, expires March 31st of 2016. If you look on the cards I left on the seats, all the way at the bottom of that first column, there's a note to make to yourself about your I-9s. Are they fine? Do you need to look at them? Are they in good shape? Let's talk a little bit about how you're going to fill them out. We get I-9 forms about every 3 to 5 years. They keep updating the documents. So you want to make sure you have the form you used when the person was hired. Every time you have a new employee, the new form comes out, you don't refill out the forms. So if you have some long-term employees, Your I-9 book should have 3, 5, 8 different forms in it. You just use whichever one was appropriate at the time somebody started. And you do need one I-9 for every person working for you, plus you need to have it for terminated employees either 1 year after they leave your company or 3 years from the date of hire. And if you all want to give me a card, I can send you all this in writing. The other question about I-9s I get asked a lot is, should we keep a copy of documents or not? Do you all keep copies of your documents when you take them? Okay, do you keep copies? You don't. Okay, good. I'm glad we have a little bit of both. Do you fill out I-9s for people? No? Okay, we should talk afterward. Oh, we have another Canadian. Then you don't need them. So to our Americans, it's great to keep copies. And you just want to make sure that you're also filling out the I-9 form. A lot of people think just having the copies there are good enough. You need to actually fill out the form and complete the bottom where you're putting in the employee's hire date and signing them. So if you have any specific questions about I-9s, ask me afterward. When we talk about compliance, we always have to talk about employee handbooks. Do you guys have employee handbooks today? So one of the things that I see as the biggest issue with employee handbooks is making sure that the policies are actually up to date. Because often they get written years ago, you change things around, and then all of a sudden you don't have an up-to-date employee handbook. You want to make sure that every year to 18 months you're going through that and keeping it up to date. These are some of the most important policies that we want to make sure that you have in your handbook. The 3 that likely have changed for you in the last, I moved on to state law for a minute. Make sure that you are checking your own state law. So the things I'm going to talk about for the next 25 to 30 minutes are typically federal in nature. Everyone has different laws in their state. So I know we have somebody here from Oregon. You guys have all sorts of good things going on, especially with minimum wage. Anybody here from California? No? Oh, you are. Lucky you. That is a whole different world of employment law. So people in California have to be especially careful of state law. The best way to check your own state laws is just Google DOL for Department of Labor and your state initials, and it'll come right up. So if you want, as I said earlier, if you want to give me your business card, I'll be happy to send you all of this information at the end. And somehow I missed, so I'm going to go back to one thing that doesn't seem to be here. And that is the policies right now that are especially important to include in your employee handbook. We want to be talking about a social media policy. Each of you today, especially operating retail organizations, should have policies of what your employees can and can't say about you and your store. So do you want them announcing sales that you're having on social media? You want to make sure that they're not announcing who came in and tried to use their credit card and it was denied by their bank. So you want to make sure that that is all spelled out, what people can and can't do on social media on your behalf. The other piece that we want people thinking about today is the new changes we have coming in the Fair Labor Standards Act. And when you think about that is what takes us into the whole total compensation piece. The Fair Labor Standards Act is the one law that we have in America that dictates how we pay employees. And it covers everything from having children working for you to overtime laws. And that's the piece that we need to talk about for a minute right now. But make sure that you understand how young people can be working in your stores, that you understand when overtime comes into effect. So for most of us, we pay people time and a half, anything over 40 hours in a week. Even if they're a part-time employee, if they are working more than 40 hours, they have to be paid time and a half. Sometimes we hear employees trying to tell us that they get double time. There is no federal law of when double time would come into play. So that would only be your state law. The other piece you have to be careful about is meals and breaks. There is no federal law for paying people for breaks or mealtime, but some of your states may have a law about that. So you want to be careful about how you're dealing with meal and break time. And now we have nothing up here. Why not? Sorry, I didn't realize you all were looking at just a purple slide. So these are all the pieces. The other thing I get asked about a lot is keeping timekeeping records. You need a record from every employee of when they came in and when they left. So make sure that you're doing that. But what's making news today that's really important is the change to the overtime rules. And what's really changing is not so much that we have overtime. We've always paid people overtime. What's changing is the minimum salary. So if you currently have people today that you are paying a salary, effective December 1st, 2016, the minimum they can make is $47,476. We had a fabulous conversation in January at the RISE conference about this, where Outdoor Industry brought together a huge group of retail people. This number is impactful to many, many retail operations. If you currently today have anyone on your team that is paid a salary and makes less than $47,476 a year, you've got to start to think about how you're going to take action around that. So what are you going to do? The first thing you want to do today is really think about how this is going to impact you. So for those of us we have here in the audience, do you have salaried, maybe managers, assistant managers that fall into this category? This is something you need to take very seriously immediately. And so there's a big section on your card of what you need to do. So the first thing is to think about how much time do those people actually work over 40 hours a week? Any of you who have employees, this is a great conversation about the new change in overtime laws you might want to hear. So your first step is how much do they work even over 40 hours a week? The second thing I want to encourage you to do is really think about the job description, because one of the criteria is that they truly have to be exempt under the law. So the first thing is they have to qualify to be paid a salary. Now, likely any of your store managers and assistant store managers would qualify. So that would be okay. But we want to make sure that the job description reflects that. You want to give thought between now and December to how you're going to track time. Because one of the issues is going to be to ensure that you've got a good way to capture what's going to happen with these employees. The change in overtime law is likely going to impact those policies we were talking about a few minutes ago. So if you have policies, for instance, about people being authorized to work overtime, you're going to want to add them to your employee handbook. you have got to look at how this will impact your 2017 budget. There's no doubt that the increase to these employees will, in fact, change your budget. Now, at the Rendezvous conference that OIA is having in September, we're going to have an entire session on how to figure this out. And one of the pieces we're going to talk about is the math you can do so that it doesn't impact your ultimate budget. And if anybody wants to ask about that afterward, I'm happy to stick around. But we're going to have an entire hour at Rendezvous going through this whole change and how it's going to impact you. And then the last step is creating communication for your employees, because for whatever reason, employees prefer to be salaried. There's a certain amount of prestige that goes along with that. And having this conversation about them suddenly becoming an hourly employee can sometimes be a difficult conversation to have. So again, I can talk to you after, or we can talk about it at Rendezvous. It's going to be a great session. As we talk about compensation, these are 3 terrific websites that you can use to go to find out what people in your local area are getting paid for certain jobs. Salary.com is probably my favorite. The ONET is one that is run by the federal government. So the nice thing for a lot of our outdoor industry participants is that ONET will likely be more effective in rural areas. Excuse me. Salary.com is going to be a little bit more in the bigger areas. And then the last piece of the puzzle is Glassdoor. Do you all watch Yelp to see what your customers are saying about your location? Glassdoor is exactly the same for employees. So Glassdoor is where your employees may go to post positive or negative things about you and your organization. Now, I don't recommend that you necessarily have to watch as often as you watch on Yelp, but certainly after, thank you, Brianne, certainly after you have somebody leave your company, go look on Glassdoor and make sure they're not saying nasty things. Glassdoor does give you the opportunity to reply, so feel free to keep your eye on that in case there's anything you want to put. Glassdoor also allows employees to post their salary. So you can go and see, which is nice. Sometimes you can see out there what your competition is paying. So we had been talking about, some people in your local area. Glassdoor could give you the opportunity to take a peek into what they're paying. Let's also talk about benefits for a minute. I always encourage small business people to think outside the box, because often you aren't in a position to offer medical insurance. Are you all offering medical insurance to your employees? Okay, great. These days, it's an interesting conundrum. But there are lots of other things, especially when you're hiring outdoor enthusiasts to come and work for your organization. I know as I've worked for other outdoor industry conferences, things like the Rise and Rendezvous, we talk about, for instance, whether or not you allow your employees to do private tours. And are they doing those private tours on their own, or are they doing them for your organization? A lot of times they're doing them as their own side business, or maybe they're allowed to get tips when they go out and do tours. So make sure that as you're looking at compensation, you're really thinking about all of the different ways that you offer people an opportunity. Maybe you can sell them equipment for their favorite sport at a discount. Those are huge ways for small businesses to add to the overall compensation and benefit equation. The next piece I want to talk about is recruiting. And how do you, in fact, find really, really good people? That tends to be the hardest part for almost all of our small retail shops. Recruiting you have to see as a three-piece puzzle. The first is attracting the right people to your business, then converting them to be employees, and really the piece that I am most passionate about, which is retaining them and making sure that, in fact, the people that you have that you want to stick around do. Now, at the same time, I will tell you that I encourage you to think about getting rid of those people that are not really very good. I was talking to somebody the other day who owned a small pet business, but the same thing as you all that might have 15, 20, 30 employees. And they had an employee who essentially didn't want to play by the rules. She was great with customers, she sold a lot for them, but she wouldn't fill out the documentation they were asking for, and she wouldn't, at the end of the day, do what they asked her to do. I told them it was time to get rid of that person, because ultimately the message that you are sending to all your other employees is that mediocrity is accepted here. And everybody, I promise you, will go down to that level of performance. Instead, you want to make sure that what you're doing is retaining the top talent that will really drive your organization forward. We talked a minute ago about job descriptions. And now I really want to hone in on why a job description is such an important part of the recruiting process. First of all, it will get you all aligned on the same page with what you're really looking for. Job descriptions often get written and then left off to the side. You want to use job descriptions as something that you are often updating throughout the course of someone's employment. So I think when you're hiring a new person, it's a great time to pull out the job description and see if that's even the job you want done anymore. I mentioned a couple times, if you want to give me your card, I can send you a job description template that's really easy to fill out. The other thing that's so important in your world is that your job description contains the physical requirements. Depending on exactly what your store is all about, you may need people who can lift heavy equipment. You may need people that are working on bicycles, people that are getting skis down off high shelves. So you want all that in the job description so that you are able to legally only include people as candidates that can do those physical requirements of the job. While we have very stringent discrimination rules here in America, it doesn't mean that you have to accept someone who isn't able to meet those physical requirements, but they have to be spelled out in advance. If you wait for somebody to come in a wheelchair and then you say, oh wait, sorry, I just realized you can't work here because you can't lift the skis, you're going to have a problem. So you want all that documented as far in advance as you can. And again, on the cards, there's a place you can indicate whether or not your job description is something you want to check or something that you're in good shape about. But the most important piece about recruiting is asking the right interview questions. What has changed today? The technical term for the way we ask interview questions is called behavioral-based interviewing. And what does that mean? Instead of saying to someone who comes in, tell me what you would do if a customer came in with a return and was furious because all we give is a store credit. They're going to give you the answer they know is appropriate in that environment. Instead, what we want you to ask is, tell me about a time that a customer came in and asked you to do something that was against the rules. How did you handle it? Have them give you very specific examples of how they've behaved in those situations before. Often I know that you hire younger people, college students, high school students, probably even. And so people say to me all the time, what kind of interview question am I supposed to ask? This may be their first job ever. Assuming that you're in a place where teamwork is important, and in almost all of our organizations, teamwork is important, I love to have you ask the question, tell me about the last group project you had in school. How did it go? And have them tell you. How did they deal with the person who didn't pull their weight? What did they do if the grade for the whole class was or project was a C and they knew they did most of the work? We've all lived through group projects, and I think for younger people that can be a really interesting question. But to just ask them, tell me why you'd like to work here, they're likely going to say, well, I'm an outdoor person and I'd love to be here. It would be a lot of fun. Instead, ask them, tell me about something you decided you wanted to join in the past. How did you get involved? That would tell you, if they joined a club at school, for instance, how did they really decide, get involved in the inner workings? Did they volunteer for a committee? Or did they just show up at meetings and not really do much? That's likely what they're going to do around your store. So again, the cards give you a place to write all this out. We want to talk about a situation or a task, an action, and then the results is how you go through working out these questions. So the final piece I want to share with you with the couple of minutes that we have left are a couple of my very favorite HR tips. And these are on the back of your card. Some of the technology solutions, or a place where you can write down anyway, some of the technology solutions that really will in fact help you in human resources. The first is an automated timekeeping. Oh, sorry, I went too far. Oh, don't look at that. We're going back. Hold on. Okay. The first is an automated timekeeping system, which many of you might have today. Understand, people have to punch in and out, and we don't have time to really talk about how that can also be a headache, but if it is, come and see me. I'll be happy to help you with it. There we go. Okay. You likely don't really need an applicant tracking system at your sizes, but what I would encourage you to think about is whether or not your payroll system allows applicants to enter all of their data themselves. If it does, and it's something you're already paying for, then all you do is hit a button and they'll come into your payroll. All right, well, it wants to go ahead, so we'll let it. But the other things you're missing are employee self-service. Any of you that are paying for a payroll system should have a system that allow your employees to get their own payroll information out. So if you today are paying to have check stubs delivered to your organization, stop it right now. If you are reprinting check stubs for employees, you can typically stop that right now, all through employee self-service. So really think about it. And this is, which is just dying to come up, the last piece that I want to make sure all of you as small business owners know about. Employment practices liability insurance is part of your property and casualty policy through your current vendor. You may have it, you may not have it. I don't know if you have it or not. But call your provider. What employment practices liability insurance will do is it will cover you from any employment practice. So if you have a harassment suit, if you have a wage and hour dispute, if you have anything having to do with your employees, this is insurance that will cover you. So I recommend people where expense is an issue, get a really high deductible, because what you're really trying to do is protect yourself from those claims of $1 million that might really shut your business down. So think about whether or not you have this, and ask your property and casualty vendor if it's something you can add. For most of your size businesses, it should be a couple $1,000s a year. I know that sounds like a lot, but it really can add a lot of protection. So I see you guys writing my info down. I do have business cards. If you want one, you can give me one of your cards. I will stay here for a few minutes, and then I'm going to be at the Outdoor Industry Association booth for the rest of the morning. If you have any questions or want to talk, I'm happy to answer them. So thank you for having me. Hopefully it was interesting, and maybe I'll see you at Rendezvous in September. Thanks, everyone.